All right, everyone, please welcome Allison Jia. She's going to be our first college student speaker of the day. Allison is a student researcher, aspiring biomedical engineer, and a recently graduated senior from the Harker School who's now attending Stanford University in the fall. Allison received the Intel Foundation Young Scientist Award at ISAF, or International Science and Engineering Fair, for her work in creating a live imaging platform to visualize the neurodegeneration process responsible for diseases like Alzheimer's. So without further ado, we're going to get started. This is basically going to be a discussion between us and Allison about any tips she has for college advice, any tips she has for specifically like biomedical engineering. So I'll start off by asking a few specific questions that we've already laid out. And then if you guys have any questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat, and we can always address them. So our first question for you, Allison, thank you so much again for joining, is why and how did you become interested in biomedical engineering?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Diana, for inviting me here today. Seems like, it's going pretty well. I'm glad everyone is learning a lot. I guess the reason why I'm interested in biomedical engineering, and just bio in general, it stems back to what I did in, lower school and middle school, actually, I'd say. Going back to lower school, I feel like I've always been pretty interested in biology. And I don't know what it is. I think maybe the hands-on activities, and I remember in fifth grade, one of the strongest memories for me was when we dissected a worm in our fifth grade biology class. And the guy sitting next to me was like, ew, it's a worm. I don't want to touch it. But I was like, oh my God, give me the knife. I want to do this. So I really enjoyed that aspect of biology where it's, you got to be super hands-on, and you got to really just put yourself out there and dig in. And so that was really where I first started getting interested in biology in general, I'd say. And then as for my research, it's a lot of research surrounding neuroscience. My interest in neuroscience kind of stemmed from middle school, where I'd participate in a lot of middle school summer camps, for any middle schoolers out there right now, at middle school summer camps at like our local museums. I did mine at like the local tech museum, where I got to learn a little bit more about I think we dissected a cow brain in one of the summer courses. And then I got to do a lot of other really cool hands-on biology things, a lot of and I started learning more about neuroscience in eighth grade-ish. I did my first eighth grade research project thing. It was a behavioral science project, and that really got me interested in neuroscience. And then in high school, I was part of the same organization that Diana is part of right now, which is Society for Neuroscience in the Bay Area. And then there I got to learn a lot more about, we heard from a lot of really great speakers who are in the field of neuroscience, doing a lot of really cool research. We did our own brain dissections for students, free for students around the Bay Area, and so many more activities. And I think that, just learning about neuroscience as I go throughout high school, learning more about biomedical engineering as a whole, just really kind of cemented my interest. Again, I'm going into Stanford undecided, but I do think it'll probably be somewhere in that field. Yeah, very long answer.
This is a more specific question, but if you had to choose between majoring in neuroscience and biomedical engineering, which would you pick?
It's a good question. I think I still have to do some more research into that. For me right now, I just think something that I've been finding pretty cool recently is like the medical devices. And so, or like wearable technology, for example. So some things that I thought were really cool were like there's something called like an e-tattoo, which is like a material that you can put on your skin and it helps you measure. It's like a tattoo that like measures your vitals, whether that's like your heart rate or your, that's the only one I can think of right now, but there's more that it measures. And it's pretty cool. And I just think that technology like that is super interesting. So right now it's more biomedical engineering. If I can include something with the neuroscience, like if the what's it called? There's a better word than this. It's not brain prosthetics. That's not the word I'm looking for, but it's like the idea that the electrical activity from your brain can stimulate muscle movement and stimulate some like muscle.
Oh, like
it's just not coming to me right now.
Like BCIs?
Yeah, I think so.
Brain computer interfaces.
Yeah, brain computer interface. That's what it was. My brain just blanked. Yeah.
No worries. Awesome. Well, I know you mentioned SFN and like some of your middle school summer camps, but what are other like important activities? Like I know you did research, maybe other competitions, internships that you did to get like more involved in STEM, and that really inspired your interest.
So what other things I did?
Yeah, like what other activities?
Yeah, so in high school, I was super well. I guess my biggest involvement was was my 4 years in society, Bay Area Society for Neuroscience. I'd say that was probably the biggest. Um, I guess outside of like I had my own separate research internship, so I guess those two were my two biggest kind of science commitments. Um, Society for Neuroscience was more of like a community than I feel like it was. You know, when you're in a research setting and you're more working, you know, you're learning things from reading papers, you're like designing your own experiments, doing the hands-on work. Whereas I felt like Society for Neuroscience was more of meeting other people like Diana, who is equally as interested in neuroscience as I am. And so those were like my two biggest activities. And I think it was a pretty cool balance. One is like super academic focused. The other one is more of a community based organization, but still around an interest of mine. And then some other, so beyond research and beyond SFN, I also was the vice president of our school's research club. And so if any of your schools have research clubs, I really think that it's a great opportunity to get involved. What we did, we held like monthly workshops on things like how to get an internship or introduction to science fair, or you know how to communicate your science to an audience, because that's super important. And then another thing I was really into in high school was we had a student-run science journal as well. So it's kind of like journalism, but obviously for science research and science articles, where I wrote two debates with like another one of my friends. One was on the pros and cons of gene patenting, which is like, for example, if I just want to like take this, like if I find this gene segment really interesting, I want to patent that so I can do all the focused research on it and no one else can take my like study that same DNA sequence, I guess. And then so we wrote about the pros and cons of that. Another example, we wrote about like the scientific merits of Eastern medicine. And so that was a really great way to get me more involved in learning how to like write, like verbally, not verbally, write and communicate science, which is like another very important skill too. So I think those were pretty much my biggest science related commitments in high school. Yeah.
What was like your biggest or like your most significant resource that helped you get to Intel and ISAF?
My significant resource? Oh, what do you mean by like resource?
Like if it was like a mentorship, if it was the support you had in your research club or
Yeah. Then I would have to say it was definitely my mentor helped a lot. So I think because I'm the type of person, so I ask a lot of questions. So I kind of felt bad for my mentor sometimes. I just like hammer him with questions. And then you know, I asked him for some papers to read. So I always went through those. If I didn't really understand, I'd like write it out as a specific question and then ask him at like the end of the day, like, I didn't understand XYZ in the reading. And then we through the lab meetings too, I'd say like the support that I built in my research internship was extremely invaluable. I got to work with two other undergrads in the lab, and then my mentor, another senior scientist, and of course my PI. And I think that support network was definitely very useful. If I had any questions whatsoever on like a lab procedure or on a technical term that I didn't understand, you know, I feel really comfortable asking them like, hey, I didn't understand this. Could you explain this to me? And then if, you know, like when I learned how to, in the lab meetings, when I was presenting my science, if my mentors have any feedback to give me, they would always help me with that. And so I think that also helped me fine tune, first of all, my understanding of what my research was about, and second of all, how to present my science effectively. So I would say yeah, my mentor, my not even just a mentor, but my mentors, plural, in the research setting was my greatest resource.
I have a question. How can you get access to a wet lab if it's really hard? Because like some schools don't offer research programs like Harker.
Yeah, for sure. So that's actually something we present on in Research Club. At least for my lab, I think you have to be 16 years or older to work in a wet lab. And you have to be 16 years or older to work in a wet lab. And then so a great like resource that we tell students is to reach out to postdocs in labs. So not just like, that when you like open for example, you want to intern at, I'm just going to bring up my own school, like Stanford University, for example. You can first Google the fields that you're interested in. So neuroscience, just another example, and you can see the different labs that these professors are working in and see their specific work. And then if you want, you can make a spreadsheet of like specific labs that you think are are doing some pretty interesting work. And then contact the postdocs in the lab, who probably have a little bit more time than the PIs of the lab to like read through your email and ask them for an internship that way. Or you could do some like reading about like some of the papers that they may have published in the past, and then try to like reach out and ask for questions. And then if you develop that relationship with the PI or with the postdoc, then it's typically much easier to get an internship. Yeah. Hope that helps.
Yeah.
You have a question here. Where did you do your research? Was there like a what specific lab or internship or mentor did you work with?
Yeah, so I did my work at Stanford University because it's pretty local. This is where I'm going, but it's pretty local to me. I live in Cupertino, which is like 20 minutes away. And so I worked there over the summers and over my school breaks too. And then I worked in the Department of Neuroscience, the Yanmin Yang lab. So my work was doing a lot of work with microtubules and like a specific protein called tau, which is in charge of holding these microtubules together in the cell. So that was just a very high level summary of what my research topic was, but I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that too.
Oh yeah, you can take that.
Okay. So I see in the chat that Michelle has a question. Do you have any advice relating to presenting / talking to judges? This is a super, like presenting your science in general, I think is a super important skill. I think I've mentioned this before. Advice related to presenting or talking to judges is to, and you might have heard this already, but it's like to keep it like a conversation. So a lot of the times when students present their science, maybe it's nerves, but maybe it's something else, but they'll feel a little bit like rigid or robotic in a way where they're just kind of reading off their poster board. Make sure that when you talk to your judge, it's a conversation. Like they're not trying to poke holes in your research. Like they know that you hear, because when we're all high school, I'm not anymore, but we were all high school students. And so they're just trying to understand the work that you did and like how much you understand as well. So I always tried to keep it a conversation with my judge, and then give them a quick overview of like what your research is, and then ask them if they have any questions they're interested in. In terms of also, I guess, so that's more of like talking to judges. In terms of presenting, I've always found it pretty helpful. So I was lucky enough to have like one of my best friends. She's also pretty into science fairs. And so before the science fairs, we'd actually present our projects to each other. So her project was a chemistry project. My project was a molecular cellular biology project. And so we didn't really understand each other's fields, which I thought was very important when we were presenting, because then if I presented my project to her and she didn't understand something, I'd have to figure out a way to better phrase whatever it was that like I'm trying to present, so that it'll be clear for her, because chances are if she doesn't understand it, maybe a judge probably won't understand it either. So we would do that to each other, and I think it was a pretty great way to get started on like presenting. Yeah.
what do you feel has like really helped you get into college and into like Stanford University?
Yeah, that's another great question. I really don't know, but I honestly think it was probably my ISAF experience and the award that I received at ISAF. Obviously, that's just for me. Like, that's not it's you don't have to get that award to get in, and like definitely not. I was fortunate enough to receive that award, so I think that did help. I will say though, I think what else? I really do think like the other activities I did too, like Bay Area SFN, also helped a lot. You know, just to show that I was more of like a well-rounded student. I guess it was still STEM. Honestly, I don't know. I think I'm gonna like pinpoint on to my ISAF award, but that's
So
just.
do you feel like it was more like the activities more than like the essay and stuff like that?
In my specific case, I'd probably say yes. But again, I'm not admission, so I really don't know.
I got a question, like back to the internships. I feel that it's like getting an internship with one of these like I don't know what I don't remember what they were called,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it seems like pretty hard or complicated to get an internship or a mentor from like a specific person that like seems to have so much work on their hands, plates,
Yeah.
all that research and all that stuff. So who do you like, where do you recommend that we start or go to get resources on who we can get a mentorship or internship from? And what do you recommend that we do to ensure that they'll accept you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first of all, I know it seems super intimidating to reach out to like someone who's done like this groundbreaking work. You're like, oh my God, I'm just a high school student. How am I supposed to ask them for an internship? I understand that can seem super intimidating, but after you get to know them, at least they're all humans at the end of the day. And so one thing they do, I know they do, like you mentioned, they're very busy. So if you show that you have that initiative, that you've taken the time to do that background knowledge, they don't necessarily want someone who's going in the lab and saying like, hey, I don't know anything about your work, but can I have an internship here? Then there's like a low probability that they'll take you on. But if you've shown that you've done some research into like what they're doing, you think, hey, like I think that your work on microtubules is super cool, or I think your work on DNA sequencing is really amazing. And then maybe if you have like a couple specific questions or like stories even relating to why you want to work to their lab, it helps them realize that you're not like that they don't have to put as much work into you because you're the one who's like willing to put that work on yourself. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if that. Okay. Yeah.
So I have a question about your research. So when you were working under the guidance of your mentor, was it the lab's research that you submitted for science fairs and ISAF, or was it your own individual research?
Yeah, so my research was actually an independent project. So it was like kind of a side project to the labs. Like it was still related to microtubules, but my research is more focused on a protein relating to microtubules rather than the microtubules themselves. So that was more of like I wouldn't say it's the lab's like focus. It was more of a side project.
Oh yeah, and then my second question is like, how was your ISAF experience? It's like it's always so cool to see it from the outside, but I don't know what's
like. I really enjoyed my ISAF experience. I thought it was one of the coolest things I've ever been in because I got to meet a lot of teams from around the world. One thing that I remember was that really sticks out in memory was, there's like this public showing day where you can just walk around and you can see teams who've done work from around the world. And I've never taken a Spanish course in my life, so I can't speak Spanish. But one of my friends who did, he was like the same Silicon Valley fair, who qualified with me. He was like, Allison, like come to this booth. And it was a group from Peru. And he was like, and then he started speaking in Spanish to them. He was like explain to her your project. And so they explained it to him, who translated it to me. And then I asked him questions and he translated it back to the group. And so we had like a kind of like a, even though we don't speak the same language, we still spoke the same science, I guess. So that was one memory that really stuck out to me.
So cool.
Oh, that's so cool. Wait, I just have a quick question about like your mentor. So was your mentor like from the lab you were interning for?
Yes. My mentor was the senior scientist of the lab that I worked at. Because so like if I had questions on, so a lot of the stuff, like the question that I explored wasn't really explored before, but obviously as a scientist who's been working in that field for so long, he knew a lot. So definitely helped.
What was your lab called again? I didn't quite catch it the first time.
The Yin and Yang Lab, Department of Neuroscience.
Oh, Michelle asked, what other competitions did you enter? And I'm also curious, did you enter like any Olympiads?
Oh yeah. Actually, it's something I should have brought up. I forgot. Well, in terms of science fairs, I entered JSHS, which is a pretty popular one, Junior Science and Humanities Symposium. And then I also entered, in terms of Olympiads, I took the USABO, USA Biology Olympiad. I took that twice in my freshman and junior year, I think. And I got semifinalist, but I remember when I was taking that semifinalist exam to go to finalist, I literally was staring at the questions. I was like, I have no idea. So it's hard. Like those exams are pretty difficult. And then what other competition? I mean, I've done a couple of like math competitions too, like AMC. Amy wasn't too good at Amy though, but yeah.
But you qualified for Amy?
I qualified for Amy.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, I think Catherine asked earlier what your favorite research project in high school was.
I'd probably have to say was my ISAF research. I like to call that research my baby because I put a lot of effort into that one. I guess to explain it briefly, I think Diana gave a super like a high level explanation that I told her, which is essentially there's a protein called tau, and it's a protein that helps basically stabilize the cell structure. And so when this protein becomes mutated, it turns into these like toxic clumps that start clumping together more and more. And then all of a sudden the cell cannot stabilize anymore. And then when you have when the cell eventually dies because it's not stabilized anymore, these tau clumps actually have the ability to somehow escape the dying cell and be uptaken by nearby healthy cells, healthy neurons. These are all neurons, by the way. So healthy neurons. And then that transmission process causes this whole domino effect of dying neurons, which essentially is neurodegeneration. So my project was to visualize the uptake of the toxic tau clump into the healthy neuron, and that's called like a transmission process. So I ended up capturing a real-time video of that process, and so that was my resear's my baby.
Yeah, I have one question. How do people come with like ideas for ISAF or like in science fair? Like how can you formulate an idea for that can, you can enter into a science fair that you'd feel like would do okay or well, that you like?
That depends on choosing like a field that you're interested in, right? I don't know what fields you're interested in.
Let's do biology because honestly.
Well, biology is a very, very broad field, whether you like you like genetics or you like behavioral psychology or something like that. So it's a pretty big, broad field, but in like whatever specific direction that you're generally interested in, I would say do some general like research. When you look at like what professors you want to work with, you can look at some of the research that they've done, and then you can start asking yourself questions and then have conversations with with other people. Like the fact that you're already at this conference here, I'm sure you've already heard from a lot of really great speakers. And if you think they're doing really, really awesome work, you know, there's no harm in trying to reach out and just be like, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. And then I mean, they're all busy people. So if they don't respond, don't take it personally. But, you know, it's a good way just to ask questions because, and I'm sure like in science is like never ending, right? There's always some question to be answered. So when you show that you have the background knowledge and when you show that, you know, like this is when you start asking questions about like the papers that you're reading, then that automatically leads to new conversations and then new questions that you can explore.
There's another question from Matthew, different from the current topic, but why did you decide to attend Stanford for your undergrad?
That's a great question too. So I got to know because I worked at Stanford in high school. I got to know two of the Stanford undergrads there, and I really enjoyed working with them. They always had super interesting stories. They were really friendly people, and I just enjoyed working with them in general. And then I think for me, at least, if I wanted to study, you know, bioengineering, I thought that Stanford was a pretty great place to do that, to explore a little bit more. All the mentor I had at Stanford too was incredibly formative for my science research journey. Like he was always open asking to answering my questions, and then like reaching out or things like that. And so I think just the support I got from the Stanford community, and then the continuing like the cool programs that they have at the school too, you know, made me choose it.
Yeah, I want to ask about like all the competitions and stuff that you've done, and I want to try not to come off as like offensive saying this, but what is the benefit
Mm-hmm.
for you in the future,
Mm-hmm.
like after you finish college and everything? What is the benefit for you getting all these rewards and doing all these competitions and stuff like that and getting?
Yeah, that's not an offensive question at all. Don't worry, I'm not offended. The I guess when I graduate college, that is a great question to ask. Like, what benefit do I do from having had experience with all these competitions and the awards? I think that it's like the skills that I gain from doing these competitions. And so when I'm in science fair, I'm presenting to a judge. When I'm doing USABO, like that means I probably studied some like biology concepts, right? That the presenting my science to a science fair judge, I'm 100% sure will be useful for me in the future, like no matter what I do. Presenting anything to anyone is just such an important skill. There's that saying, it's like if you have a great idea but you can't communicate it, then like what's the point? This is not, I'm just paraphrasing the quote, but it's like something about that. Like if you have a great idea but you can't communicate it, then there's really no point to your idea. So like that kind of skill I think that I got from doing science fair, I'm pretty sure will last me for a lifetime. And then the award itself, you're right. Past college probably wouldn't even matter. But the fact that, you know, the skills that I gained from there and the friends, like our ISAF chat still has, I think someone made like a Facebook message and there's like a couple hundred people in there and they still chat like day to day. Like those friendships too are really invaluable. And then like the story from me communicating with the Peru team, even though we don't speak the same language, I think that memory and that like that motivation for me to keep doing science is that's what's valuable from doing all of these. Does that kind of answer the question?
That was helpful. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, it is 4:30. Thank you so much, Allison, for joining us. I hope everyone enjoyed her talk and our discussion as much as I did. You know, Allison has some amazing advice. If you just tuned in, you should go and watch what she was talking about.